Welcome back to my channel, Coding Environment. In today's video, we will see what is optional class in Java. It is one of the features introduced back in Java 1.8. So without making any delay, let's see what is optional class in Java. So to illustrate how optional class works, I have created a very small program. So in this, you can see we have a student class which have two data fields. One is the name and the other is the age. After that, we have two constructor. One is a default constructor and one is a parameterized constructor, which is taking name and age as the input parameter. This will be used to create the object of the student class. Now coming back to the driver class, here you can see that I have a main method and there is a method which will return the student. Now just assume that as a programmer, you want to read this student from a database. So what you will do is you'll call this student object from your driver method. In this is the main method, right? So we will just call this method get student, and from the student object, we can read the data from the database. But of course, I'm not going to read that data from the database. For this illustration purpose, I'm just going to create a student object here. So I have created that student object here, and I will return that student object from this method. So you can assume that you have read this student object from the database or any persistent system. Now this student object we will return from this get student. So we can store this returned object in one of the variable, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a var. So I'm going to create a variable and I will store this object into this variable object. So after getting this value from this get student object, any programmer can use this variable to print something of the data, right? So I can just print something that name of that student, okay? So if you run this code, you can see that the output of this program is John, right? Now just assume that while you're trying to get the student object from the database, there is no object. So in that case, you will not get any data from the database and you'll return null from here. If you do this, what it will do? If you try to print the name of this var variable, it is going to throw you a null pointer exception, right? So just run this code and we can see that it is giving you a null pointer exception. So this is the problem which optional class is going to solve. So basically, optional class will act as a container and we will fill that container with this student object, and instead of returning this student object, we will return that container. So what we will do is we will not directly return the student object. We will return this optional class which is given by Java in Java 8. We will return this optional class which is going to hold the object of type student, okay? So what we have done here, we have like created a student object and then we have to create an optional class which is going to hold the object of type student, right? So this you can say my optional variable, and we have to create a optional object. And how we're going to create? We will create by dot, and then we can use of and off nullable. Okay, so I will explain these two methods where if I have to set off nullable, which indicates that the object which you're going to set here can be null also or can be a value also. So here you can send it as an object. So this is basically your student object, right? So we have add this object, student object, into this optional container, and we will return this optional container from here. Okay. Once this optional container is returned to this driver method or the main method, now how you will access that student object which is inside this optional class? To do this, we can use this var optional class and then we can say get. So you can see it is returning you that student object. You can say get and then if you say its name. So if you do like this, you will get that John, you will, okay, so we have missed something. We will add it here. So now you can see after running this program, we are able to get that student name which we have set in this line, which is nothing but the John, right? Now what can happen? See, this is one problem here. So in this, you can see that if you're trying to read an object from a database, and that time you can get no object from the database. And in that case, you're setting this as a null. Now, if you're setting this value, which you're trying to add the value into this optional container, you are setting it as a null, right? And now when you're returning this optional container or class to the driver method, here if you're trying to do this get and if you're trying to do this get.name, this is going to give you a no such element exception. So let me run this code here. You can see we are getting this no such element exception because you have not added a valid student object into this optional container and you're trying to get that object which is not present into that container. So to overcome this, if you set this as a like off, and if you are trying to add a null value here, you will get a null pointer exception. Okay, you cannot add a null value here because you are using this off method. If there is a possibility that the object which you are trying to add into this can be null, so you have to say that off nullable. Okay, so this is the difference between off and off nullable method of this optional class. Coming back to our original problem, like where we have added a null into this optional container and that optional container is returned to the driver method and we are trying to access something which is not present. That's why we had got that no such element exception. Now how we can solve this problem? So to again solve this problem, we can use this if var dot is present, which is saying that there is some object present into it. There is some element present into it. And then if it is there, then you can use this dot get name, and else you can say that I want to print something else, which is like any name, any default name. So I'll just say default name here. And in this case, if you run this code, instead of printing this John, it is going to print you this default name. So just let's see. So because we have set this object as null here, and if you see this is present is going to return you false because you have not added a valid student object into this optional container, right? So because of this particular line is going to say it is false and you're going to get this default name. So you can ask me like, what is the difference between checking this as a like null pointer exception? So we can check that if this optional is not there, we can check that a student is not equal to null, then print this, and if a student is equal to null, we can use this some default name, right? Yeah, this can be done, but if you are using the optional, if you are you just consider that you are trying to write a interface and where your interface or your REST API or any method is getting consumed by a different developer, if you write this student object, he may not be aware that you can pass it as a null also. So if you are saying this as an optional, he is knowing by default that this optional can contain null also. So he has to check this. So this is like giving information to the other developer by the signature of your method that this method can return null and it can return the objects which is of type student in this case. So this is like giving information to the other developer upfront. Now let's explore the other method which is also given by this optional class. So just assume that we have called this method and we are expecting that there will be some object into it or there will be some object of the student into it. But there can be a situation that it is not set, right? So what we can do is like to get this or just like we have written this code. So just assume this. So we have written this code, right? So where if it is present, we are printing the name of that student which is inside that optional class. And if it is not, we are printing this default name. So how we can write this 4 line of code in 1 line? So just see, this is one of the method of this optional class, which is or else. So this or else method, right, what it says is, right, if there is any student object wrapped into this var optional, it is going to return you that student object. And if it is not, it is going to return you this default student object which we are going to create here. So we will just create a student object here and just set something like some different name, like, yeah, Ram, and one is we can create select 24. Okay, so this is the like thing. Now this or else we will store into some different variables. So a student one we can say, and now see this or else how it is going to work is like, if there is any student into this optional class. So let me add this here. Okay, so let me add this here and show you. So we will get rid of all this, and okay, now if I run this code, let me print this variable also. So shout, it is like stud1 dot name. Okay, now let's see it. So see here in this get student method, I have created a student object with the John name, right? And I am setting this optional class with this object. Now if I'll run this code right now, it is going to give me, with this or else method, it is going to give me this object which we have created here. Okay, let me run this and then you can see it. So the output of this program is here, this student object which we have created with the name John, it is printing that name, right? So it is containing that object. Now just assume instead of setting this object, I am setting it as a null. So there is no object into this optional class. And in this case, when this particular line will execute, this particular or else method will execute, it will see that there is no object of this student class present in this var optional. In this case, it is going to give you this default student object which we have created here. So if you run this, in this case, you will get the output as a Ram. So just see it. So see here, it is not finding any student object into this var optional, and then it is giving you this default name which we have given in this argument. So this is one of the method which is going to replace all your 4 lines. So similar to this or else, there is one more method which is called or else get. Okay, so in this, instead of here, what we can do, we can just create an object and pass it as a like a student object, right? But in this except one lambda expression which can be used to do anything just with what we can do with the lambda, right? In this case, I'm just going to again create that student object with some different name. I will just say Sita with age like 20, and yeah, then I can just say that I have created this age, and okay. So this method, right? This method is going to again do the same thing. If it is going to get any student object in this optional class which we are returning from here, it will give you that optional class. Else it is going to run this lambda expression, and then it will return you that return value of that lambda expression. So in this case, suppose again we can store this student object, right? So student object we can store here and do anything like we are doing here. We can also print this thing here. So this is very simple or else and or else get method. We have seen is present method. There are different methods also which you can explore further. There is one more method. I'll just type it here. Like this is one very important method, or else throw. So in this case, what you can do is like if you're not getting any object from that student object, you can throw your own exception. So it is just used to throw the exception to the upper layer, or who is the caller of that method. So this is also one of the very important method. I hope you understand what that optional class is. It is basically a container which is used to hold the objects of different class. So if you ask me, is there any class inbuilt in Java which is using that optional class? Yes. If you remember the array list, like how we create an array list, we create it like this, right? This is an optional class. Here again, just like we add this student object, this is also we can say. So what we are saying is like we can create a student array list, right? Is equal to new array list. So this is one of the optional class can hold the type of that student object into it as a list, right? So here you can see this is a kind of optional class which is already inbuilt in Java. So I hope you understood what is optional class in Java with all these examples. If you have any doubt, please write it in comment section. I will try to answer it. If you liked it, please subscribe to my channel and stay connected. Till then, have a great day and goodbye.